Hi everybody, this is lecture number 3, Southeast Asia, and this corresponds roughly to chapter 13 of your textbook, or pages 283 to 296. Alright, well, Southeast Asia has experienced much change throughout history. Many nations of Southeast Asia, we've learned, were colonized by European nations beginning in the 1500s. Southeast Asian nations were battlegrounds during World War II as Japan attempted to create, quote-unquote, Asia for Asians, meaning the Japanese. Following the defeat of the Japanese at the end of World War II, many colonies in Southeast Asia will begin gaining their independence. These independence movements were inspired by nationalism and a desire for self-determination after extended periods of foreign rule. With the start of the Cold War in 1945, many of these newly independent nations will become surrogate nations where Cold War conflicts played out in proxy wars. Newly independent nations in Southeast Asia will also have their fair share of transitions in government, with many nations turning towards totalitarian forms of rule. Well, today, many nations in Southeast Asia are considered developing nations with vast social differences. Southeast Asian nations are made up of urban populations, meaning people who inhabit cities and have access to modern life. A lot of these people live in cities throughout Southeast Asia and have similar lifestyles, just like you do here in Brighton. These cities often have working and middle-class individuals with homes or apartments, as well as a wealthy upper class of people. But most people living in Southeast Asia live in more rural areas that are still industrializing or experiencing more traditional lifestyles that are based on subsistence farming. Many nations in Southeast Asia today are still dependent on the developed world, with a dependence on cash crop production. However, this dependence is decreasing as these nations continue to undergo economic development. Many Southeast Asian nations are still in the process of building factories and developing modern transportation and communication systems to more readily compete in our interdependent world. Southeast Asian nations have approached economic development differently from one another. Some nations originally chose command economies following independence, like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Myanmar also has a mostly command economy. Remember command economies? These are economic systems where the government makes all or most of the economic decisions, or they're the ones who control the means of production. Many or most businesses are state-owned and operated under a command economy. Command economies are typically present in communist nations, and the government decides what to produce, how much to produce, and how much to charge for the items. Communism is sometimes called Marxist socialism. Socialism simply means that society shares resources and revenue to create programs to benefit its people. And Marxist socialism is the most extreme type that you can have of socialism, based on the ideas of Karl Marx. And it's the same thing as communism. Okay, so communism is sometimes referred to as Marxist socialism. See, in today's world, some governments are more socialist than others. For instance, Canada has a national health care system that is paid for in the form of high taxes. Other nations have higher taxes in order to pay for higher education, like in Sweden, where university tuition is pretty much paid for by the government. Countries of the world have many options about the types of social services they can provide their people. Other nations, like the Philippines, have market-based economies. Most nations of the world today, including Southeast Asia, we've already learned this too, they all have mixed economic systems, meaning they use a combination of economic systems. Vietnam has gradually changed from a purely command economy to a more mixed economy today. So if you go to Southeast Asia today, you'll see a mix of different economic systems. We use tax money in the U.S. to pay for public services. So believe it or not, we have a mixed system here too. We have elements of socialism in our own economy, because we use tax money in the U.S. to pay for public services like schools, police, and fire departments, amongst other things. So are we a socialist country here in the U.S.? Well, somewhat. We have a mixed economic system. Regardless of the economic systems present in various nations of Southeast Asia, it is clear that all of these nations are making efforts to industrialize and compete in the world marketplace. Some smaller countries in Southeast Asia that lack an abundance of land or natural resources have used their population as a natural resource. What? Yeah, Singapore invested heavily in its education system and created a qualified workforce, so they're literally using their people as their main resource. Consequently, under leaders like Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore has become a top exporting nation in Southeast Asia of quality electronics and manufactured goods. Many high-tech companies are present in Singapore today, and the wealth they bring the nation has resulted in Singapore's designation as one of the Asian tigers. It should be noted that Singapore also has one of the highest literacy rates in the world today. And their students typically are some of the highest scorers in math and science on standardized tests. All right. Well, most people in Southeast Asia are farmers who help to produce about 1/3 of the world's rice. With so many people dependent on agriculture for their survival, many nations have invested in modern farming methods. Remember the Green Revolution from our India unit? The Green Revolution has been a push worldwide for modern farming techniques by using new types of seeds, genetic engineering, fertilizers, pesticides, as well as new types of irrigation systems. Although we learned about the Green Revolution during our South Asia unit when we studied India, did you know that it was actually a revolution that began in Southeast Asia in the 1960s? Well, yeah. Chemists there developed a rice seed for Southeast Asia that could double the crop yield. That's to say, double the amount of rice that they were producing. Technology can make a huge difference in people's lives in terms of not just food. If a family of subsistence farmers can double how much they produce, that means they will have a potential surplus of rice to sell and make some money. If they have extra money, they can build more comfortable lives for themselves, send their children to school, and could have some degree, perhaps, of social mobility. The Green Revolution is about so much more than just farming, you know? However, the Green Revolution has had some negative effects on the world. The Green Revolution has had a negative impact on the environment, for instance. Pesticides and fertilizers often drain into water systems, causing health issues, as well as killing wildlife. Although food shortages have been reduced, it's also disrupted traditional life in Southeast Asia. Some argue that there is less of a sense of community in some smaller villages today than in years past. Also, some farmers have purchased modern machinery to harvest for them, leaving many people without jobs. These people are sometimes forced to move to cities in order to find work. Many of these people end up in slums in the city. This leads to another issue in Southeast Asia: urbanization. Urbanization is a term that means the rise of cities. As commercial farming grows throughout Southeast Asia, with the use of modern tractors and other machines, fewer workers are needed for harvests. The unemployment this creates has resulted in many people moving to cities looking for work with their families. Bangkok, Thailand is a great example of this. With only 1.5 million people in 1950, its population rapidly swelled to over 7 million people today. And although there are both working and middle classes of people that are on the rise in Southeast Asia, many people in Southeast Asia are poor and they outnumber these other classes. Many of these people often take low-paying jobs in factories located in the cities just to survive. These factories are often making clothing for large overseas companies. There's a big difference between social classes in Southeast Asia today. In many cities, one observes shantytown slums next to million-dollar high-rise condos. Although Southeast Asia is still undergoing development, it continues to offer a unique and rich cultural history to the world. Southeast Asian writers continue to make major contributions to world literature, often with an emphasis on writing that focuses on its Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions. Many modern writers have tackled current issues like the differences between the rich and the poor. In terms of the arts, music, dance, and drama, they're all pretty closely related or linked in Southeast Asia. Gamelan orchestras are composed of a variety of Southeast Asian musical instruments like gongs, drums, brass kettles, xylophones, stringed instruments, and wind instruments. Gamelan bands often accompany dance or dramatic productions in Southeast Asia, like shadow plays or other forms of dance. Southeast Asian dance often shows less movement than Western-style dance, with an emphasis on facial expressions as well as symbolic gestures. Southeast Asia's cultural heritage makes it a prime vacation spot for travelers from around the globe. Many people tour the Angkor Wat ruins in Cambodia with their Hindu roots, remember, based on the god Vishnu. Travelers also flock to Ananda in modern-day Myanmar, where there are thousands of Buddhist temples, often identified by their vast stupas. This is an architectural style for Buddhist temples. One of the most famous of these towers over stupas towers over Ananda and rises some 163 feet into the air. There are also many Buddhist statues dotting the landscape there as well. Another famous destination is Borobudur on the island of Java in Indonesia. So Borobudur. It's a Buddhist temple with a stupa that is 5 stories tall. Many tourists in Southeast Asia buy finely produced wood carvings and other handicrafts. They are known for their colorfully dyed textiles using the batik method and fine metalwork like tin and silver from Thailand. So I hope that gives you a better picture of Southeast Asia. Thanks for listening. Bye.